The Philadelphia 76ers sure have been a dumpster fire this season. I always knew giving Paul George a huge contract would be a huge mistake, but it's gone bad quicker than I expected and worse too. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong for this team. The Sixers have no leadership, and lack of availability from the two highest paid players on the team has also really hurt them. If there's anyone else that really didn't already learn from the Lakers with Russell Westbrook that allocating 70% of your salary to just 3 players is a terrible idea, the Sixers should be just as much, if not more, of a cautionary tale when it comes to doing that. It's especially bad because everybody already knew that Paul George and Joel Embiid are both injury prone, yet they still decided to give PG the bag and have him join forces with Embiid. As of the recording of this video, the Sixers have the 5th highest cash total per days missed this season. The regular season is supposed to be when you build good chemistry as a team and develop good habits together. The Sixers have done the exact opposite. It's already January and the Big Three have only played 10 games together. The Sixers have played well in those 10 games, as they are 7-3 in those 10 games. They need more games together though to really have good chemistry. This sounds somewhat reminiscent of the Nets Big Three, but at least 2 out of the 3 members of the Sixers Big Three are homegrown. The members of the Nets Big Three are more accomplished than the current Sixers Big Three though. In terms of how when they did all play together, they played well, but there just wasn't enough continuity. That's where they're very similar, but there's also plenty of obvious differences in how these teams became so dysfunctional. Tyrese Maxey has played the most games out of the Sixers Big Three and has scored 26 points per game, but very inefficiently, especially for the modern NBA at just 42% from the field and a true shooting percentage of 55%. He has not been on par with what he was last year when he won the Most Improved Player award. In the collab I did about the decline of the NBA, we talked about teams taking too many threes. Maxey is totally contributing to that problem by taking over 9 per game while making just 33%. But now here's the elephant in the room. Paul George. He is everything wrong with the modern NBA star. That term should be used very loosely at this stage of his career, but even when he was a perennial all-star, that was true. This podcast he's doing is looking like a huge distraction. I understand he only does about 1 podcast a week and has tons of behind-the-scenes people who edit them and make shorter versions of the podcast for him. However, when his team is struggling, he really should be leaving that alone. That should be an off-season thing or a life after basketball thing. I don't mind guys showing up on a podcast as a guest from time to time during the season, or if it's life after basketball, that'd be amazing for him to be able to do. I love watching all the smoke. Right now though, as he and his team are in the midst of a disastrous season, he needs to leave that podcast alone and focus on how to help his team win and show that he's at least a little bit serious about basketball. Paul George is the 2nd highest paid player on the team, and he's not playing anywhere close to the standard that should be expected from that contract. For him to spend time being a podcaster in season while his team is in the midst of a losing season and he's severely underperforming really tells me how unserious he is. He is a huge reason I believe NBA contracts should not be fully guaranteed. Unless a buyout happens, which I'm definitely not expecting because he has to agree to that too, and there's no way I see him doing so when he's making the kind of money that he's making. I already saw how disastrous it was for the Lakers 3 years ago to allocate 70% of the team's salary to just 3 players, so I knew this would be a bad idea for the Sixers too. As much as having the best players on the court matters more than anything, your depth matters too, and it's hard to create much depth when you allocate 70% of your salary to just 3 players. PG has always had a great skill set, but if you've actually watched games and followed his career closely, you'll know he doesn't have it mentally, nor does he want it enough to be more than just an all-star. He even said on his podcast what he seems to be more passionate about than actually playing basketball.
At this point, I'm not even necessarily it's not even about, people saying chasing a championship. It's not that. But it's playing the right style of basketball. Is what I'm chasing.
What does that even mean? What style of basketball is even the right style if you're not all in to win? That was already a red flag, and he's already had so many more even before this. That right style of basketball sure isn't winning you a lot of games. It's unbelievable to me how he claims to have idolized Kobe, wore 24 when he first came into the league, and wears 8 now, even named his dog after Kobe, yet he embodies absolutely nothing thing about Kobe. Kobe didn't even let his team do the Harlem Shake unless they won a championship in the midst of a highly disappointing season that his team was having in 2013. Yet Paul George is happy to keep his podcast going. Aside from the ridiculous things that Paul George may say, if you watch his games, you will see that he has a lot of holes in his game and makes so many boneheaded plays. Two that I can think of with the Sixers. Towards the end of a game against the Suns, with his team down 2, he decided to dribble out the clock before he took the last shot. You do that when your team is up or tied. I don't know how an NBA player needs to have this explained to them, but if you're down, you want as many opportunities to score as possible so you don't waste any time. Because Paul George decided to dribble out the clock and he missed his shot, even though his team got the rebound, they were able to do nothing with it. Against the Hornets, he got the ball with the game tied, 8 seconds left, and he just held the ball for 5 seconds, only to take a well-contested step-back 3 instead of making a quick move and going for a 2, which was all he needed. Luckily, the Hornets are just garbage and the Sixers won this game in overtime anyways, but he probably wouldn't get so lucky against a good team. He's always had a problem with making the game harder for himself. PG recently said about having to play center in Embiid's absence.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. I'm used to scrapping and running around and chasing and fighting through screens, and to be honest, I'm bored. Playing and on a 5, just don't do enough for me.
I understand if he's not comfortable doing it because he's a wing player, but you cannot tell the media that you are bored of it, and to call out your teammate like that, not that Embiid is not guilty of ever doing so either, but while your team is maybe the biggest disappointment in the NBA right now, it's things like this that make Paul George the butt of so many jokes, even if he's more than likely going to be in the Hall of Fame after he retires. He has a great skill set, but he does not have the mentality nor the heart of a champion. This is certainly far from the first time he's ever said anything ridiculous to the media either.
Y'all ain't met Playoff P yet, huh?
Thunder home. Lillard, long range 3, and it's good! At the buzzer! Damian Lillard! Are you kidding me?
That's a bad shot. I don't care what anybody says, that's a bad shot. But, hey, he made it. That story won't be told, that it was a bad shot. We live with that.
Now you can say Paul George is playing better as of late, as he scored 20 plus points in each of his last 3 games as of the recording of this video. However, 3 problems. 1, the Sixers lost all 3 of those games. 2, I don't trust him to sustain it once Embiid comes back. If he does, and whether he does or not, and if the Sixers are able to make a playoff push, we saw enough of Paul George for years to know what happens to him more often than not when it comes playoff time. He's not built for those moments. 3, he's only played in 3 of the last 6 games, so how are we supposed to believe that he's actually hurt at all? He has no reason to be missing games right now. So now on the subject of Joel Embiid, when he refused to hold himself accountable after an abysmal performance in the playoffs against the Celtics.
You can't win alone. I can't win alone. Me and James, we just can't win alone. That's why basketball is played 5-on-5. So.
I became sure of it that he doesn't have what it takes mentally to win a championship, and he's never going to win a championship until he changes his mindset. Then in November, while the Sixers were losing to the Knicks at halftime, Shaq had this to say.
Joel Embiid will never win a championship until he gets his mind and his attitude right.
Shaq is someone I definitely expect to know what it takes to win a championship, knowing he's a 3-time Finals MVP, and I completely agree with what he said. I said it way before he did. It didn't stop there though. When the Sixers had a players-only meeting after a blowout loss to the Heat earlier this season, it was reported that Tyrese Maxey called out Embiid for being late all the time. According to Lou Williams, the situation was being blown out of proportion as Embiid and Maxey were sitting next to each other as they were on the phone laughing and giggling. Regardless of which story is actually true, neither is a good look for the Sixers. Paul George then made a foolish decision to talk about the players-only meeting with Reggie Jackson on his podcast. Where are your priorities? Now we're hearing that Embiid may be done for the year, and if he is, it's a lost season. Even if Embiid does come back and does stay healthy, I still need to see that he can perform in the playoffs, which he hasn't proven he can do, or to at least make the playoffs. Well, it's going to be really difficult for the Sixers no matter what to at least avoid the play-in tournament. Another problem that's happening in Philly, Nick Nurse is not looking like the coach we once thought he is. This is actually a huge surprise, knowing he coached the Raptors to their only championship in franchise history, and even after Kawhi left for the Clippers after that one championship, the Raptors actually had a better winning percentage in the following regular season, and Nurse was named Coach of the Year. His Raptors had the second-ranked defense, so seriously, what happened to this guy we once saw as such a great coach? Earlier in the season, his players actually asked him to coach them harder, and in turn, the coaches said they want the players to practice with purpose and attention to detail. Whoa there! The Sixers have also had plenty of instances of big defensive lapses, as they're ranked 20th in defensive rating in the league right now. It is definitely harder to defend when Embiid isn't playing the majority of her games. I get that. What should not happen though is you guys not communicating properly, and that's something that coaches have to take some responsibility for. Or in their latest game against the Pacers, I know the Sixers were shorthanded with both PG and Embiid out. Nick Nurse played this guy Pete Nance at center for the final 7 minutes and 23 seconds in what wasn't exactly a close game but was still very much winnable. They had Andre Drummond starting at center in that game, and sure, he's not a very good center either, especially at this stage of his career, but still more of a center than Paul George. And for whatever reason, Nurse decided to throw in this guy who only played 2 games this season going into that game and didn't play a single minute in that game until there were 7 minutes and 23 seconds left. That's just mind-boggling. I know 7 minutes and 23 seconds while you're down 13 isn't exactly a close game, but I've seen crazier comebacks than that happen before. Now, we've been seeing it for years that
Tobias Harris over me?
has come back to haunt the Sixers, and it still is to this day. When the Sixers failed to retain Jimmy Butler and gave Tobias Harris the max contract instead, they lost what's a huge missing piece on this team. A leader who we all know is one of the few players in today's NBA that we can consider a fierce competitor. After he went to the Heat via sign and trade, Jimmy has gotten his team to the finals twice as underdogs. It was also Jimmy who carried the Sixers to 7 games against the Raptors in 2019, while Embiid and Ben Simmons absolutely stunk. If Jimmy was still a Sixer, I'm sure of it that he would have at the very least gotten them to the conference finals at least once, somewhere they haven't been since Allen Iverson took them to the finals way back in 2001. Unlike any other stars to play for the Sixers since they became a winning team again in 2018, Jimmy's the only one who we know to step up his level of play come playoff time. Everyone knew before the Sixers signed Paul George that he tends to do the exact opposite way more often than not. Now, things may have gotten toxic in Miami with Jimmy Butler this year, but at least we know not because he's not serious about basketball. That could never happen with Jimmy Butler, but we've been seeing it with Paul George. And Joel Embiid doesn't necessarily have the best leadership qualities either. You know what especially looks terrible for the Sixers right now? Paul George was supposed to be an upgrade from Tobias Harris. However, Tobias Harris is back with the Pistons now, and the Pistons are actually not that bad this year, while Tobias Harris has started more games for them than anyone else on the team. His stats may look even less impressive than Paul George's, but he's been a lot more available for a team that's actually winning more than they're losing. Meanwhile, the Clippers, who let Paul George walk and got nothing in return while still owing OKC 3 more first-round picks, including the option for a pick swap this year for the trade they made back in the 2019 offseason, were still able to get some really good role players and a great defensive-minded coach as the lead assistant in Jeff Van Gundy. As a result, the Clippers have actually done pretty well, even with Kawhi Leonard missing the first 2 months of the season. They've defied the odds. It's not always the names in the resume that make a winning team. The Clippers should have been losers here for SGA and all those draft picks that they gave up just to get Paul George, only to lose him for nothing, only make the conference finals once during his time there. I thought both teams would be losers, but actually the Sixers are the only losers here. Between the Sixers, Pistons, and Clippers, the Sixers have the highest total salary, and 70% of it is allocated to just 3 players. The Pistons have the lowest salary in the entire NBA, yet the Sixers are the ones who have the worst record out of these 3 teams. You know what else? Remember back in 2018 when the Sixers traded Mikal Bridges for Zaire Smith, who played a total of 13 NBA games in his career for 2 seasons, and a 2021 first-round pick after drafting Bridges 10th overall? The first-round pick they got in return in that trade was part of the trade for Tobias Harris 8 months later, and yes, Harris was more ready to help an NBA team win than Bridges was at the time. Long term though, this turned out bad for the Sixers. Not only is Bridges a better player than Harris now, but he also provides something that the Sixers desperately need: availability. Bridges has never missed a single NBA game in his career. Just what more can I say? The Sixers are a mess. It takes a lot more than talent to win in every sport, and from what I see, the Sixers are just not serious enough, and the guys upstairs have made the wrong decisions for way too long. Even without winning at all, if you at least show that you care and play your hearts out, the fans will love you. Just ask Allen Iverson. He may have never won a ring, and yes, he had his flaws, but his effort was absolutely never one of them. For that, he will always be one of the most revered athletes to ever play in Philadelphia. Unfortunately for the Sixers, I don't think any team really wants to take on Paul George's contract when he's not showing he's serious enough and just seems to be happy with getting paid. Because he's obviously just happy he's getting paid, of course, he won't agree to a buyout, as much as that would be the most selfless thing he can do at this point of his career and then just retire. The Sixers are just stuck with Paul George until he's 38, something I knew all along they'd regret. The red flags have been there long before Paul George ever played for the Sixers, so they really should have known. Lastly, Josh Harris, you're an amazing owner for the Commanders, and you deserve a lot of praise for how far they've come under your ownership, but you've been terrible as the Sixers co-owner. You and David Blitzer just can't put the right people in charge, nor for the New Jersey Devils, who the Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment LLC also own. I don't know anything about hockey, so I just looked at the Devils' records since they bought the team, is how I even know this. With the Commanders, it's just Josh Harris, and David Blitzer has nothing to do with it. That's the one team that actually seems like they have any direction right now. The Sixers and the Devils though, it's just bad. So that's all I have for this video. Do you think the Sixers can turn it around? Please let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be much appreciated. Please be sure to consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. If you're a new subscriber, welcome to the team. And if you're already subscribed, thanks so much for your support as always. Links to my social media are down below for my more immediate reactions to what's going on in the sports world. If you'd like to see my most recent video or the one that YouTube recommends, both are up above. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.